Rain drummed against the tin roofs of the quiet neighborhood, a relentless rhythm that echoed the shivering in his small, soaked body. He was just a shadow pressed against the alley wall, ribs visible beneath filthy, matted fur, eyes wide and pleading, reflecting the dim amber of a distant streetlight. Every drop of water seemed to weigh him down. Every passing car blurred him into invisibility. He yelped softly, a sound half swallowed by the night, half carried by the wind, but no one stopped. Footsteps hurried past, umbrellas bobbing, muffled conversations and laughter passing over his world like a tide he could never reach. Hunger clawed at his belly, exhaustion racked his limbs, and yet, somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope flickered. He raised his trembling head toward the nearest human shadow. A silent plea caught in the H of his throat. No one turned. And then, in the stillness after the storm's heaviest beat, something shifted. An unseen hand reached down, a warmth that could melt months of neglect, and a chain of events that would transform his fragile, broken life began to stir. The alley smelled of wet concrete and decay, a sharp, metallic tang rising from puddles that reflected the dull glow of the broken streetlights. He pressed himself against the corner, a small ball of fur trembling with every shiver, his ribs pressing sharply beneath the matted coat that barely offered any warmth. The rain had soaked through layers of grime and cold, settling in his bones like an unwelcome weight, making every breath a labor, every movement deliberate and cautious. Sounds came in fractured bursts, the hiss of tires on asphalt, the distant wail of a siren, a door slamming somewhere up the street. They all seemed so loud, so alive, and yet in this cacophony he was invisible. He lifted his head, the dim light catching the moisture in his eyes, and scanned the faces hurrying past. Umbrellas bobbed, coats brushed together, hands clutched phones. People existed, but none existed for him. He let out a quiet whimper, the sound breaking into the night like a fragile glass, hoping, perhaps foolishly, for acknowledgement. A footstep paused briefly in the distance, then moved on, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his own loneliness. Hunger gnawed at him, but he dared not move too far. The street was a river of unpredictability, and he had learned the hard way that curiosity could be fatal. The puddles reflected a fragmented world, distorted and liquid, much like his perception of safety. Every shadow seemed to shift, becoming something else when looked at too long. A flicker of movement across the alley caught his eye, a rat darting along the wall, small and confident in the night. He tensed, a reminder of the primal hierarchy he existed within, where he was at the bottom, and survival was measured in stolen scraps and avoided dangers. His stomach twisted with ache, a dull, constant pain that matched the ache in his chest. But still, he did not give in to the despair fully. There was a flicker, a stubborn spark, of something that had not yet been extinguished hope. Somewhere above, the rain began to lighten, falling in soft drizzles that painted the alley with tiny rivers of silver. He stretched his neck, sniffing at the air, catching scents of bread, of wet asphalt, of passing life, human life, so close, yet so untouchable. The cold was a companion he could not shake, but the hunger and fear were sharper knives. Each breath steamed in front of him, a visual pulse of his fragile existence. He tried to remember warmth, the faint memory of hands that once reached toward him without malice, but the memory was distant, fraying at the edges like old cloth. A sudden gust carried a familiar sound, the distant laughter of children, the patter of small feet running in play. For a moment, it was almost unbearable, a reminder of the worlds he would never fully belong to. He shrank back against the wall, ears flattening, trying to make himself disappear, yet drawn instinctively to the sound. The mixture of longing and fear knotted within him, tightening his chest, making his heart beat a frantic drum that he feared would give him away. Still, he dared a glance toward the light, toward the possibility of someone noticing, someone offering a shred of mercy in a world that had been relentlessly indifferent. Time passed in uneven bursts, minutes that felt like hours, each second a negotiation between survival and despair. The rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, and with it, his body began to relax marginally, muscles unclenching as his eyes adjusted to the shadows. He dared to crawl forward a few inches, small movements measured and cautious, pressing paws into cold, wet concrete. Each step was a test of courage, a quiet rebellion against the loneliness that had become his constant companion. Then, in the faint glow of a flickering streetlight, he caught it, a shadow that lingered longer than others, a warmth in the night. He froze, ears perked, heart hammering. The figure was distant yet deliberate, movements careful, hands reaching down in a gesture he recognized from fragments of memory. Hesitation rippled through him, a battle between instinct and desire. Could he trust this? Could warmth truly exist in this world for him? Or was it just another trick of shadow and light? The drizzle fell softly now, a rhythm that matched the thrum of his heart, and he inched closer, small paws slipping on wet concrete. The figure knelt, eyes locking with his, and for a fleeting moment, it felt like the world held its breath. A hand extended, not pushing, not forcing, just offering, and something deep within him stirred. A fragile, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he would not be alone tonight. The air was thick with the smell of rain, soaked asphalt, a blend of city grime and fleeting freshness. A paradox he could not name but felt in every trembling whisker. The figure crouched a few feet away, its shadow long and hesitant in the dim glow of the flickering streetlight. The dog's body froze, muscles taut, fur damp and plastered to his spine. Every instinct screamed retreat. Humans had often been the source of pain, of shouts, of cold indifference. Yet something about this one was different. There was a patience in the way the hand hovered, a softness in the posture, a warmth that seemed to radiate through the drizzle and seep into the cold night. He took a cautious step forward, paw pressing lightly into a shallow puddle, sending tiny ripples across the reflection of fractured streetlight. The sound made him flinch, but the figure did not move aggressively. The hand extended again, slower this time, palm upturned, inviting. The dog's ears flicked, tail lowering slightly, a careful negotiation of fear and hope. Memories of harsh slaps and thrown objects flickered in his mind, gnawing at his courage. Yet something stronger, a yearning he barely understood, pulled him closer. The figure's voice was barely a whisper, a soothing thread woven into the soundscape of dripping water and distant traffic. "It's okay! It's okay!" Each syllable seemed to vibrate with sincerity, and the dog's body, taut with tension, quivered in response. He inched forward again, paws sticky with mud, eyes locked on the warmth emanating from the human's coat. The light caught the moisture in his eyes, turning them into tiny pools that reflected his fear, his longing, his fragile hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt that maybe he was being seen, truly seen by someone who might care. The figure knelt fully now, the coat brushing damp concrete, forming a bridge between two worlds, his small, trembling body of fear and the human warmth that had felt like a dream. Slowly, deliberately, the hand moved closer, fingers relaxed, inviting trust. The dog hesitated, tail tucked tightly, whiskers quivering in the cold night air. He raised his head slightly, sniffed the faint scent of soap and earth, and in that instant, a single heartbeat of courage surged through him. A cautious, almost imperceptible step forward, then another, until his nose brushed against the hand. Warmth, real, tangible, and comforting, radiated through him. The human smiled softly, a gentle curve that spoke of patience rather than triumph, of kindness rather than possession. "It's okay, little one, you're safe." The words were soft, almost fragile themselves, but they carried a weight that settled in the dog's chest, a balm to months of neglect and fear. He pressed his head tentatively against the hand, muscles still tense, every nerve alert. Yet the warmth made him want to stay. A drop of rain slid down his nose, blending with tears he did not know he had been holding. The alley, once a place of shadows and whispers, now felt almost like a room with walls built from hope itself. But trust was not instantaneous, it was a slow, deliberate thing, fragile as the puddles under his paws. The human remained still, letting the dog dictate the pace, offering presence without pressure. Slowly, imperceptibly, the dog inched closer, tail flicking in short, uncertain movements, nose nudging the hand, ears relaxing fractionally. The world around them, the dripping rain, distant car engines, flickering streetlight, became a muted stage for this small, tentative communion. Each breath they shared was a negotiation of fear and hope, a silent contract signed in the language of warmth, patience, and vulnerability. Minutes stretched, elongated by the careful rhythm of cautious steps and measured breaths. The dog finally allowed himself to press his entire small body against the human, a fragile, trembling surrender that spoke volumes. There was no sudden leap of trust, no cinematic miracle, only the painstaking, honest work of bridging the chasm of fear. The human whispered reassurances, fingers tracing over the damp fur with deliberate gentleness, each touch a promise of safety, each stroke a plead stay, survive, believe. The rain began to soften to a drizzle, the alley's oppressive shadows losing some of their harsh edges, as if the night itself was granting them a fragile reprieve. He sniffed the air, ears flicking toward the world beyond the alley. The sounds of life, so distant yet no longer threatening. A tentative understanding passed between them. The human would not hurt him, would not force him, would simply offer presence. The dog lowered his head fully, eyes half-lidded, breathing shallow but steady, letting the warmth seep into his chilled bones. And in that quiet moment, amid the dripping rain and the faint hum of distant traffic, the first thread of connection took root. Fragile, trembling, yet unbreakable. He was no longer entirely alone. The world outside the alley might still be indifferent, the rain might still chill his bones, but there was a hand willing to hold, a heart willing to care. And for the first time in a long, endless stretch of shadowed nights, he allowed himself to hope that rescue, real, tangible, transformative, was not just a dream, but a possibility waiting in the dark. The first careful steps out of the alley were measured, hesitant, each paw slipping on the slick concrete, leaving tiny prints that would soon vanish in the fading drizzle. The dog's muscles were coiled with tension, eyes darting at every shadow, ears flicking at every sound. He had survived nights like this before, nights of hunger, of cold, of distant noises that promised danger. And yet, something was different now. The hand at his side, steady and unhurried, was a promise he could almost, but not entirely, trust. The weight of the world pressed on him. Still, a street lamp flickered violently overhead. A car roared past. The wind whispered threats he could not name. And yet, he walked. The human's voice was soft, rhythmic, a tether to calm in the chaos of his mind. "Almost there? Just a little further." The words were gentle, carrying no commands, only reassurance. The dog's paws felt every drop of rain, every rough patch of asphalt, every uneven crack beneath him. Each sensation was magnified: the cold that bit at his belly, the ache in his limbs, the wet that clung to his fur like a persistent shadow. But even as his body recoiled against discomfort, his mind was learning something new. That not every hand that reached toward him caused pain, that warmth could exist in the world beyond hunger and fear. When they reached the edge of the street, a moment of hesitation froze him. Head low, tail tucked, eyes scanning the moving shapes of passing cars and silhouetted pedestrians, he questioned whether stepping into this wider, louder, unpredictable world was wise. The human sensed it, adjusting their own body to appear non-threatening, crouching slightly, eyes level with his, fingers extended again, brushing lightly against his head, a gentle touch that said, "Without words, you are not alone." That single gesture, fleeting yet profound, became a hinge on which trust swung delicately forward. Then came the first barrier, a discarded cardboard box in the gutter, a puddle deeper than anticipated. The dog jumped backward instinctively, muscles tight, breath short. The human chuckled softly, a sound full of patience, not amusement, and encouraged him with a steady voice. Slowly, painstakingly, inch by inch, the dog negotiated the obstacle. Paws splashing lightly in the water, claws scraping concrete. Each small success ignited sparks of confidence, though fear still lingered like a persistent shadow. The alley's darkness had taught him caution, but now, each hesitant step was a whisper of courage, a rebellion against months of neglect. Finally, the human guided him into the safety of a car parked just beyond the streetlight's reach. The door opened, spilling warm, dry air into the night. Hesitation froze him again. The confined, new space smelled foreign, mechanical, yet strangely promising. The human kneeled beside the open door, inviting him in, their hand hovering just above the floor as though asking permission. The dog's stomach twisted with anxiety, but the memory of warmth, the memory of the gentle strokes, the patient voice, and the unwavering presence, called him forward. A single step, then another, until his paws were fully inside. The human closed the door slowly, deliberately, sealing them both in a cocoon of quiet and warmth. Inside, the world was transformed. The damp chill of the alley gave way to soft, enveloping heat. The sharp smells of wet concrete and rot were replaced with muted fabric, the faint scent of soap, and an earthy hint of human presence. He pressed himself into the corner of the seat, muscles taut, tail flicking nervously, still unsure, still wary. The human reached out again, this time placing a careful hand on his back, their fingers tracing the matted fur with deliberate gentleness. The touch was firm but tender, a grounding sensation that began to ease the tension in his trembling limbs. The journey continued in slow, quiet increments. The dog's ears picked up every new sound, the hum of the engine, the rattle of tires against wet pavement, the occasional distant honk. Each vibration traveled through his paws and into his chest, a reminder that he was alive, that he was moving, that he had survived to reach this place. And yet, trauma lingered, clinging invisibly to each heartbeat, each cautious sniff, each reluctant blink. His eyes scanned the interior repeatedly, ensuring the human's hand remained where it should, the warmth constant, the voice steady. Trust was fragile, like the first spring blooms after a harsh winter, resilient yet easily bruised. Hours seemed to pass in minutes as they approached a destination neither fully understood, yet both instinctively recognized as sanctuary. The human spoke softly, naming things that were foreign to him: blankets, towels, food. Words carried weight, a rhythm he didn't know he could absorb. The car slowed, the engine ceased, and the human opened the door, kneeling to create the same gentle bridge between two worlds. The dog hesitated, sniffing the warm air, ears pricked, muscles taut. But this time, the step forward was longer, more deliberate. There was no rush, no fear of immediate harm. Only the cautious curiosity that comes when the world begins to feel safe. When the human lifted him gently into their arms, the dog stiffened for a heartbeat, then slowly relaxed against the warmth that had been promised and now delivered. The sensation was foreign, almost unbearable in its comfort. A body not cold, a hand not threatening, a presence not fleeting. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of human breathing seep into his own, letting the world blur into soft textures and muted warmth. The rescue was not a sudden miracle. It was the accumulation of careful gestures, patient steps, and the quiet insistence of someone refusing to let him remain invisible. And as they walked together toward the door that would lead to warmth, safety, and healing, he realized something astonishing in its simplicity. Survival alone had been enough for months, but now connection, real, deliberate, tender, was possible. The world outside was still vast and unpredictable, shadows still lurked, and dangers still existed. But for the first time, he had a hand to hold him steady, a voice to guide him, and a place where the cold drizzle and indifference of the night could not reach him. The first morning in the new place was soft and surreal, sunlight filtering through curtains that swayed gently in the breeze, painting golden streaks across the floor. The dog stirred, stretching stiff muscles, ribs still visible beneath damp fur that now carried the faint scent of warmth and soap. For a moment, he froze, ears twitching at the distant city sounds he had once feared. Car engines, footsteps, voices. But now they seemed muffled, softened by walls that offered shelter and a floor that would not give way beneath him. Hesitation gave way to cautious curiosity. The human was nearby, seated cross-legged on the floor, their voice low and steady as they murmured words he did not understand, but whose tone carried reassurance and gentle attention. Meals came slowly, with patience rather than insistence. The first few bites were tentative, paws shifting nervously, ears flicking at the faintest sound, eyes wide with lingering distrust. Hunger had been a constant companion, but here, food was offered without expectation, without threat. Each morsel was a negotiation between old fear and the faint promise of safety, and with every swallow, the knot of worry in his chest eased slightly. The human's hands were always close but never forceful, strokes tracing damp fur with deliberate gentleness. At times, the dog would flinch reflexively, only to be soothed by the quiet insistence of presence. Slowly, the cage of terror that had encased him for months began to crack. Days passed in rhythms both gentle and transformative. A blanket became his territory, a soft fortress where he could curl without fear of sudden intrusion. He discovered the joy of warmth seeping into chilled bones, the thrill of soft textures beneath paws that had only known rough, wet concrete. Play came slowly, tentative swipes at a dangling string, or the cautious pounce on a rolling ball. At first, the movements were mechanical. Protective gestures learned through survival, but gradually laughter, low, contented barks, began to punctuate the air. Each sound was a declaration. I am here. I am alive. I am beginning to trust. The human, for their part, learned the language of subtlety. They observed shifts in posture. The flicker of ears, the trembling of whiskers. A sudden stiffening meant a memory of pain. A relaxed tail signaled openness to affection. With patience, they mapped the terrain of fear and comfort, offering small victories and celebrating them quietly. Gentle brushes of the hand over fur, soft-spoken encouragement, and deliberate gestures of inclusion wove a tapestry of trust. The dog responded in kind nudges of the head, slow blinks, of hesitant steps closer. In these micro moments, a fragile bond solidified, built on mutual patience, respect, and understanding. Healing was not linear. There were nights of tremors and whimpers, moments when shadows in corners or sudden noises triggered instinctive flight. There were days when food was ignored, pawing at emptiness as though past hunger could never be satiated. And yet, the human remained constant. A silent rhythm of care, a presence that demanded nothing but offered everything. Slowly, the dog began to recognize the consistency of warmth and kindness. The corners of the room, once intimidating and foreign, became spaces of exploration. Each sniff of a new scent, each cautious stretch across the carpet, was an act of reclaiming the world he had been forced to survive in rather than live. The transformation was subtle at first. A tail lifted fractionally, ears held higher, eyes brightening at the human's approach. Then came the leaps of courage venturing out into the yard, discovering the textures of grass and dirt beneath cautious paws, the soft, tentative play with a ball, each roll of it a test of joy against fear. The eventual curling up on a lap, body fully relaxed, eyes half lidded in the trust that had once been impossible. With each act of trust, the dog shed the weight of months spent in shadows, and the human celebrated silently, recognizing that love is not immediate, but a patient sculpting of moments, gestures, and time. By the end of the chapter, the dog's world had expanded. No longer confined to the narrow alleyways of fear and neglect, he now possessed corners filled with warmth, textures that comforted rather than threatened, and the steady pulse of a hand that would not abandon him. Trust, once an impossibility, became tangible, measurable in the rhythm of shared breaths. The gentle nudges for attention, the quiet companionship that needed no words. He was learning the language of safety, of care, of belonging, and with each passing day, the gap between survival and living narrowed, until finally, he began to understand that he could not only endure the world, he could embrace it. The morning light spilled gently across the room, warm and golden, spilling over blankets and furniture, catching the fine dust in the air like a constellation of tiny stars. The dog stretched fully, muscles no longer stiff, for softening under the light's touch. Each paw pressed into the floor with a quiet confidence, no longer tentative or fearful. The air carried the faint aroma of breakfast, the scent of home and warmth, of water and gentle care. All the things he had once only glimpsed in fleeting, distant memories. His ears twitched at the subtle symphony of domestic life, the soft hum of appliances, the low murmur of conversation, the distant chirp of birds. For the first time, these sounds were not threats. They were signals that the world had changed for him. He padded to the window, pressing his nose against the glass, eyes bright and reflective. Outside, the streets glistened under the morning sun, puddles shimmering like liquid gold. Trees swaying gently in a breeze that carried the scent of fresh earth and life renewed. The world that had once been a vast expanse of danger and neglect now seemed navigable, filled with possibility rather than fear. For months, survival had been the only goal, the only frame through which he could interpret existence. Now, trust and curiosity interwove, creating a tapestry of confidence that had been impossible to imagine just weeks ago. The human appeared in the doorway, hands carrying small dishes of food. eyes lighting up at the sight of him. Their voice, calm and joyful, filled the room. "Good morning, ready for breakfast." The words were ordinary, mundane even, yet they carried the weight of months of patience, of quiet care, of unspoken promises kept. He approached cautiously, sniffing at the dishes, but without the flinch of fear. This was no longer a negotiation with danger. It was a choice to engage with life fully, to allow joy to be more than a fleeting whisper in the night. Each bite was taken with the quiet assurance that he was safe, that sustenance was no longer a battle, that his body could relax into comfort without guilt or anxiety. Later, the day unfolded in small, deliberate acts of joy. A ball rolled across the floor, and he leapt after it, paws striking with precision, tail wagging in pure exhilaration. The human's laughter, gentle and approving, rang in his ears, a sound that stitched itself into the fabric of belonging. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the yard in warm hues. Grass brushed against his paws as he explored, eyes scanning every movement, ears perked in curiosity rather than alarm. He paused to sniff the wind, taking in the scents of flowers, soil, and the faint trace of other animals. All of it safe. All of it part of the world he had been too afraid to claim. The transformation was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and awakening. He no longer flinched at sudden movements, no longer shrank at unfamiliar sounds. The fear that had once defined him had softened into caution, a useful guide rather than a prison. Trust had become a bridge he could walk upon, stretching to the warmth of human touch, the comfort of consistent care, the joy of playful moments. The walls of his world, once confining and oppressive, had expanded, filled with light and air, with textures that comforted and sounds that encouraged exploration. As evening fell, the golden light giving way to soft twilight, he curled up near the human, body relaxed, eyes half-lidded in contentment. The room was quiet, but alive with presence, the gentle hum of life, the rhythmic breathing of a companion who had become his world. Outside, stars began to appear, faint pinpricks in the vast sky, mirroring the tiny sparks of trust, hope, and belonging that had taken root within him. The human's hand rested lightly on his back, a final affirmation. "You are home, you are safe, you are loved." In the quiet, he lifted his head, ears flicking, eyes scanning the familiar room, absorbing every texture, every sound, every scent. And in that moment, the truth settled in his chest. He had survived, yes, but he had also lived, truly lived, for the first time. The past, with all its shadows and whispers, no longer held dominion over him. The world was no longer a place of fear, but a canvas upon which he could walk, explore, and trust. He closed his eyes, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, and let the warmth seep fully into him, carrying him into a night of peace that had once seemed impossible. Outside, the moon rose, soft and luminous, casting silver light across the yard. The dog's silhouette rested against the glow, small yet unshakable, a testament to resilience, to healing, to the quiet power of care. And as the stars twinkled above, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, a whisper in the night that seemed to echo the story of survival and transformation. Even in the shadows, hope can take root, and even the smallest life can find its dawn. Weeks had passed, and the dog's world had expanded in ways he had never imagined possible. Morning sunlight poured through open windows, dancing across the hardwood floor, warming his fur and illuminating the soft gleam in his eyes. Where once fear had ruled every movement, now curiosity and confidence guided his paws. He wandered through the house with an ease born of trust, sniffing at corners, inspecting shadows that had once loomed as threats, and testing the limits of the space he now called home. Each room, each scent, each sound was a testament to safety, a world reshaped by care and patience. Outside, the yard was his kingdom, a place of discovery and freedom. He leapt over patches of grass, rolled in sun-warmed earth, and chased butterflies that drifted lazily in the breeze. The wind carried the scent of distant gardens and passing animals, signals he once would have interpreted as danger. Now he inhaled deeply, tail wagging, ears perked, heart steady. Play had become instinct, joy a constant companion, and fear a memory that no longer dictated his life. The human, ever present yet never overbearing, watched with quiet pride. Soft words and gentle gestures still guided him, but the dog had grown into his own confidence. Nudges of the head, the soft pressure of a paw, even a joyful bark became their shared language, a dialogue of trust and love that transcended words. Nights were no longer tense or uncertain. He curled beside the human on soft blankets, breathing in sync, sharing warmth, safety, and the quiet comfort of companionship. Every so often, he would pause at the edge of the yard, ears lifted, eyes scanning the horizon. The city beyond, once a source of anxiety, now held intrigue rather than threat. He had survived the shadows of the alley, endured hunger, cold, and indifference, and emerged stronger, wiser, resilient. The streets that had once swallowed him in their noise and neglect were now part of a wider world that he could navigate confidently. In the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and painted the yard in gold and rose, he would sit beside the human, head tilted, eyes calm and reflective. Memories of fear and loneliness lingered like faint shadows, but they no longer held him. They were threads woven into a larger tapestry of survival, healing, and belonging. The bond between them, fragile at first, now unbreakable, radiated quiet warmth, a testament to patience, love, and the profound power of being seen. And as the stars emerged, twinkling above in the vast night sky, he lifted his head slightly, ears alert, tail curling softly around his paws. He understood something fundamental: life beyond the shadows was not only possible, it was his. Hope had flourished into joy, fear into trust, and the world that had once been indifferent now belonged to him in all its light, warmth, and infinite possibility.